Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another ClearView Convo. And this one, we're mixing things up a little bit today. I am thrilled to be joined not by another member of our leadership team, but by a true thought leader in the field. Joining me today is Dr. Michael Weintraub. He's an endocrinologist and obesity medicine physician at NYU Langone, clinical assistant professor of medicine in the Department of Endocrinology. He currently serves as co-chair of the Obesity Pharmacotherapy Guidelines in the Endocrine Society and as an exam writer for the American Board of Obesity Medicine. Thrilled to welcome ClearView alumnus and thought leader in the obesity field, Michael Weintraub. Dr. Weintraub, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's an exciting time in the obesity world. We just came off of Obesity Week recently. It feels like you can't go a day without some new evidence coming out around how the field's evolving, and it's such a far cry from when we worked in the field together even 15 years ago when you were still here. Maybe before we get into where the field is going, I would love just to hear a little bit more about. Tell me sort of what got you into medicine. Obviously, you spent time at ClearView. You came into your professional career from there. You've ended up in really a field that if I had guessed 15 years ago, would not have been producing a lot of KOLs. And here we are today with such enthusiasm in the obesity world. Tell me a little more about your journey and how you ended up becoming a thought leader in the space.
Yeah, certainly. And I look at my time very fondly at ClearView. I entered right after undergrad. I graduated from the Life Sciences and Management program at Penn, and had a theoretical knowledge of business and science and the drug development landscape, but far from practical understanding. And my time at ClearView as an analyst there really crystallized all those theoretical learnings. So really, went and shortly after ClearView, I went to medical school and entered the long training of becoming a clinician. And I think I'm really glad that I had the experience at ClearView before and throughout my medical training. It's something that many physicians don't really have. They kind of can understand how to treat the patient in front of them, but what about the context of how care is delivered and how drugs are developed. And that's something that I'm really glad that I had the understanding of really knowing where the unmet needs can be. How do we think about cost effectiveness? All these things that really are at play now that I am a physician. So I went to medical school and then internship. And then finished my fellowship as an endocrinology fellow at Cornell, and then now I've been a physician at NYU since then.
Yeah, and tell me on that journey too, like what was it about endocrinology and even obesity specifically that became, how did that emerge as a key focus for you?
Yeah, so endocrinology is obviously a fascinating topic. I'm a little biased, but it really exists in the realm of feedback loops and really understanding how that works and where should you intervene. And then also preventative medicine. I was actually, before deciding on endocrinology, I was deciding between cardiology and endocrinology. And there's a lot of similarities there, especially when it comes to preventative cardiology and endocrinology. And I think now it's really seen that there is a combination there, and these silos are really breaking down in, okay, how can we intervene early such that we can prevent any cardiovascular disease from even developing. And so that's really how obesity can be framed now, is the ultimate preventative strategy. Before any of those obesity-related comorbidities develop, before prediabetes or hyperlipidemia develops, can you intervene such that we can long-term maximize overall health?
Really well said, and maybe it leads me nicely into our first question on the obesity world itself. You just described obesity as very much an upstream driver of a number of these comorbidities, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, within that heart failure, kidney disease. Like there's so many sequelae, and yet I just seem to recall 15 years ago when we were working together, being borderline laughed out of the room by some pharmaceutical industry experts who thought no one will ever pay for obesity. These GLP-1 meds are going to all be generic. This is like a dead field. Why spend time here? Tell us a little like what has enabled this emergence of what seems like it should have been obvious for the longest time, that weight management has a direct implication on so many of these sequelae, and that pharmaceutical management of weight is completely appropriate and should be standard of care.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, there's always been this need. When 40% of the United States has obesity, if you expand that to overweight obesity, three-quarters of people in the United States have overweight obesity. Problem has always been there. Really, it's been well, the existing medications that we had, were not the same as what we have today. Those medications, I mean, we've had medications since the 1950s, but they've had a checkered past in their safety. Their effectiveness really has been limited. And we've lacked data showing that link from the weight loss leading to the prevention of these comorbidities. Those are the things that we didn't have, that now with the approval and availability of namely semaglutide and tirzepatide, we now have a safe, relatively safe set of medications, quite effective, more than all the existing options that we've had traditionally. And then, as you pointed out in the lead-in, every week we're having these new trials of different obesity-related comorbidities showing treatment and prevention with these medications.
A couple of really great points in there. First, I do think people often in popular media, and even outside of the endocrinology community, raise these questions. Oh, do we really know how safe these meds are? But I mean, exenatide by Etta was approved in 2009. We've got like 16 years of experience giving these medications to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands diabetics. Like truly, how safe are these GLP-1s in your opinion? And sort of like how much anxiety should there be, not just around GLP-1 chronic utilization, but even like GIP and AMA and these pathways where we probably have a little bit less longitudinal evidence?
Yeah, yeah. So I agree. I mean, the GLP-1 receptor activation pathway we've known about for 2 decades now, and we've had these medications. We haven't had these high potency semaglutide, tirzepatide medications for, of course, as long. But as a class, we seem to have a pretty good understanding about the potential for side effects. I mean, there's some limitations there. Yes, it's been studied in tens of thousands of patients, but do we have the longitudinal data in tens of thousands of patients? Not quite. Could there be, some rare side effect that occurs that we haven't yet discovered? Potentially. But with those caveats in mind, I mean, the general kind of safety or adverse events, we have a pretty good track record. And this doesn't exist in a vacuum. We always have to think about versus what benefits and versus the risks of untreated obesity. And that we also have a very good understanding about what does weight gain, excess adiposity lead to in terms of just the sheer increase in cardiovascular disease, overall mortality.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What I think is also really exciting right now is how much the mechanistic biology of therapeutic intervention is moving here. And also, I'll say still how much we actually don't know. And it's funny, like I think a lot of people falsely assume, oh, you've got small molecules, you've got peptides, and you got biologics. So peptides are like somewhere in the middle in complexity and how hard could they be to really understand. But people forget that like the entire drug development ecosystem, monoclonal antibodies are basically a backdoor to tap into hyper selective immune tolerated inhibition that was not a stepwise ability of the industry to understand molecular complexity, but truly tapped into a molecule type and a scaffold and the constant domain that allowed for systemic utilization of high potency inhibition. And within peptides, there's like 10,000 plus endogenous peptide pathways. Even now, I've yet to hear anyone give me a really clean articulation of just how semaglutide agonizes GLP-1 better than liraglutide that lets us get to higher potency relative to safety. I don't think we're going to answer that on this podcast, but I do think it reveals the level, the room for better understanding of underlying mechanistic biology, better understanding of the agonism pathways. I mean, and we're all stuck. Like, I would have never believed an amylin agonist would show 20% weight loss, and yet we all just saw the liraglutide data last week. So, like, maybe the question for you is one, is it fair to say that we are just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of the mechanistic pathways and the therapeutic optimization we can get to in modulating these pathways to optimize therapeutic benefit? Maybe let's start there, and then I'll ask a part two question after it. But what's your view on the potential for continued innovation?
Yeah. So I certainly we're at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding what different mechanisms, what the potential different mechanisms are, and then what the potential different combinations of different mechanisms are. We've known for quite some time, predating incretin-based medications, that when it comes to obesity medications, combination really is very helpful and synergistic when it comes to thinking about the hunger pathways in the brain and the metabolic adaptation that can occur with just blocking one pathway. We've known for quite some time, attacking multiple pathways and maybe low dose combinations can be really effective. And now we have to now replicate that with all these other novel incretin based mechanisms. We have some data already, of course, for GLP-1s and GIP, but there's so many other combinations that I'm really excited to see the clinical data when it comes out.
Yeah. And to your point also, you made the comment how endocrinology is ultimately a game of feedback cycles. I mean, you look at the fact that GIP agonism seems to be pretty well validated as an additive mechanistic pathway through tirzepatide's benefit. And yet there's also evidence that GIP antagonism can have a benefit in weight loss as well. There's clearly some nature of titration that will probably ultimately, I mean, 20, 30 years from now may even have a precision flavor to it. But this is where I do think that like the clarity we have on the true underlying tissue by tissue, system by system biology here, we're just getting started, and we're going to see an incredible volume of clinical data come in the next months, years, and decades that will only further sharpen our ability to understand how to optimize metabolic health. So, with that in mind, when we look today, obviously we've got two medications now, and semaglutide and tirzepatide that do drive pretty meaningful weight loss. They're not perfect, right? Like the tolerability profile prevents a lot of patients from optimizing dose, certainly leads to relatively high degrees of drop off of medication. We certainly know now that when patients lose weight on meds, like typically, not for every individual, but typically if they come off the meds, they do gain the weight back. And there's questions around how their blend of muscle versus fat is lost, what's gained back, how their health actually modifies. Maybe in your lens, like what are the biggest unmet needs the field faces today? Like if you could sort of like optimize what the next product would deliver, is it weight loss potency? Is it this tolerability and durability of benefit? Is it a maintenance piece alongside the high potencies, or are there other pieces that factor top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think I would highlight that when we have 40% of the population as eligible for treatment, there is a huge pie, and there's a lot of different subpopulations that have different levels of need that are currently unmet with these therapies. Even just thinking about degree of weight loss. I mean, we can talk about, is that even the best, marker right now or measure? But at first glance, thinking, when you look at the clinical trials and seeing 15%, 20% plus weight loss with these medications, that seems to shouldn't that cover almost everybody? Certainly not. I mean, for a couple different reasons. One, when we look at the prevalence of not just obesity, but obesity with BMIs of say greater than 40. This is a patient population that needs or medically would benefit from more than just 20% weight loss. And when you look at the prevalence of this portion of the population, BMI greater than 40, it's actually been increasing. It's now 10% of the population. There's been kind of some interesting downticks in the prevalence of obesity in the most recent studies, but severe obesity, BMI greater than 40, still is really high. And then also the individual response to these medications is far from what we see in terms of averages. There is a huge heterogeneity in response to these medications. And I have so many patients that on the one hand, they would, one might call them super responders. They're on very low doses of these medications and had a robust degree of weight reduction. And then on the other hand, I have a significant portion of my patients who, even despite being on the maximum tolerated dose, these medications are not responding. They have certainly even less than 5% total body weight loss. And so having additional medications, either in variable potencies or different mechanisms that might preferentially benefit these patients who are non-responders to the currently available agents. So I
Yeah,
certainly think that still is a huge unmet need.
really well said. And anything there's 10 different ways I could double click on what you just went into, and I'll try to keep it high level, but it's helpful. Maybe one point you did say, obviously obesity, as it persists, drives a number of comorbidities of organ-specific manifestations. And yet, I've been struck by, I think there is a general sense in the field, and this is variable by clinician type and expertise. There's a general sense that, oh, well, tirzepatide seems to be more potent. And as a result, I assume it's just as good, if not better, than semaglutide on all these other comorbidities, where arguably semaglutide has to date a more comprehensive data package. And in my mind, this flies in the face like of historical precedent where in the statin space or in even the earliest GLP-1s, like head-to-head superiority or even the possession of outcomes data that were exclusive to the molecule could really differentiate. Like, what do you think's behind this? And do you expect that to continue, that really weight loss potency will be the sole determining factor of efficacy and benefit? Or do you expect to see greater degrees of specialization of certain medicines, certain pathways being better or worse for patients depending upon their comorbidities?
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree. I mean, as the market matures and more guidelines and guidance documents come out, we're going to see that yes, weight loss should not be the sole marker when considering a certain medication. And we really should be dividing these patients into subgroups of what obesity-related comorbidities do they have, and then which medications lead to the best benefit with that particular comorbidity. One example might be metabolic liver disease. Certain mechanisms might generate improvement in metabolic liver disease over others. We have a lot of the novel mechanisms like dual glucagon GLP-1 agonist or other multi-agonists that incorporate glucagon that might preferentially benefit metabolic liver disease, for example. And so when I initially see a patient, that's going to be what I profile. And I think, okay, this patient has not only obesity with a BMI of 35, but they also have metabolic liver disease, hyperlipidemia, cardiovascular disease, but no heart failure. And how the guidelines are going to continue to evolve is to recommend a particular medication that has data for that particular disease state. We already have this. So the EASO just published, their guidance document on this exact topic, dividing obesity into, should we be looking at just obesity without comorbidities, or should we be looking at those with obesity and particular comorbidities, and then dividing, okay, which molecule has data for that particular disease state?
Yeah, no, this is all really helpful and really well said. Well, maybe I know I feel like this is a topic we could spend 2 hours on, so I'm going to move us along and appreciate the thoughts so far. I'm going to ask you to put on sort of like, you're sitting on the committee right now to try and help think through what medication guidance should look like. And obviously within that, you're going to base that upon reactions and interpretations of the data that exists. But if you think from that lens with a forward-looking hat on, like for companies that are out there trying to figure out how to best deliver against these future unmet needs, and trying to really establish leadership in a disease category that historically there have been no disease leaders. And I would argue no one's ever led in obesity until the last 5 years, and diabetes has certainly been seen reduced enthusiasm investment again until these last 5 years. What does good look like? Because I imagine that there's going to be a diversity of patient needs that ultimately will are unlikely to be served by a single pharmaceutical. How should groups be approaching this from a therapeutic development perspective?
Yeah, so I think as you point out, I mean, there's no one size fits all approach here. And what does good look like? There is, I think what I'm thinking about first and foremost right now is a lot of patients that don't come to through my door. As an endocrinologist or obesity medicine physician, I see a select portion of the population. Those who have the means and will to see a subspecialist at a tertiary care institution. And there's so many that are at the primary care level that have not yet initiated any type of pharmacotherapy. And so this is where, having different medications with different route administration, different frequency, different levels of data when it comes to potency or obesity-related complication prevention and treatment. That's going to be where this field is going to go. We have yet to really have a robust oral option, which we'll have several, I'm sure, in the near future. And that's going to, I think, be particular benefit in that primary care population. I think that's something that is much needed. And then developing a care pathway where, okay, if a patient is not responsive to a particular medication, okay, this is what triggers referral to a specialist. This is what triggers, changing to a different medication that has different properties.
Yeah, it's really well said. I'll compliment, I think, a little bit what we see on the sort of advisory commercial side. And again, like take it with a grain of salt here is it definitely feels that you're going to need a portfolio of therapeutics to really optimize care for these patients that look not just at the weight loss, but look at the long-term management, that look at the comorbidities and that specialized medications by need. I think also what's really fascinating is you are seeing, I mean, we've got the industry, if you will, in terms of like the role of a manufacturer versus the role of a wholesaler or distributor versus the role of a pharmacy versus a role practitioner. We've moved in a direction where, simplification of supply chain led to this huge growth of empowerment and entrenchment, pharmacy benefit management, and now I think that's being challenged directly in the obesity space, where not just the compounding pharmacies that got in through interesting API limitations, but really the Lillies of the world, and I think many other large pharma are going there, even outside of obesity, are developing these new models that let them go directly to the patient and the practitioner and simplify the insurance management piece, create pathways to affordable cash pay where insurance coverage does not exist, and really just empower patients and their providers to identify the best approach towards management and towards optimizing their metabolic health. I think that's what the future looks like to me, and it's why you see these crazy arms races right now of companies seeking to acquire best-in-class, innovative therapeutics because they want to build. They're intentionally building some redundancy in their portfolios so that they can really be well positioned to serve the diversity of needs that are going to emerge. And that's where I think, to your point earlier, I suspect we are just scratching the surface of what we're going to see in terms of this. Maybe one last question on that point too. As you get across it, you mentioned going back to your early days of cardiology versus endocrinology, it does feel like when you look across the comorbidities, there will be a need for multidisciplinary thinking around how standard of care evolves. What do you think that looks like? And like, do you see a world where there's even like joint guidelines across hepatology and cardiology and endocrinology and nephrology? Like what does that look like? You sit in a privileged position right now of helping to think through that for the Endocrine Society. What do you think the future looks like there around guideline shaping and treatment protocol decision making?
Yeah, and it's something already in process. I mean, in our, in our guideline, we have multiple subspecialists, whether it be hepatologists, cardiologists, nephrologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, all that need to have input to care for something that extends to all these different disciplines. And even at an institution level, we're also, breaking down the traditional silos and barriers of different departments within the Department of Medicine to really come up with better care pathways. Obesity medicine is one name for it. Now there's CKM, cardio kidney metabolic, which is just a different name for the same thing, right? And we're trying to figure out how can we integrate that along with primary care so that each patient doesn't have a delay in care, and so that there is a CKM staging model that's out that really does extend to all these different disciplines to look at where does that patient lie on that, and that dictates what level of workup, and then what treatment is going to be best for that patient. So we are seeing that the breakdown of those barriers, both at the guideline level, at the institution level, and I think that's all for the better.
It's fascinating to see, and who knows what's going to come next. I mean, we're expecting Evoke's data anytime now too. If these medications come through and show potent clinically significant benefit in reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease and promoting CNS health, it's like it is fascinating. We'll see how long until we start talking about GLP-1 additions alongside fluoride in the public water supply.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so many, we've just been limiting this conversation to the weight dependent benefits that we see, but there's all these weight independent benefits with these medications when it comes to anti-inflammatories. And we see that at the cardiovascular outcome level. And then now, what at the level of the brain, what exciting news are we going to get with these new trials?
Let's end on that. I'm glad you mentioned the weight independent benefit because too, I've seen it in clinicians I've talked to and patients I've engaged. There is a sense of like if you're not losing the weight, why keep the patient on the medication? But I think you're exactly right. The evidence is so clear that there are tremendous benefits from GLP-1 agonism, agnostic of weight loss alone. And it feels like we're only going to get smarter and richer in our understanding there. Dr. Weintraub, thank you so much for taking the time. It is a pleasure to have you join us here as our first external guest on ClearView Convos. If you're willing, we'd probably have you back in a couple months because who knows what additional data we'll have then. But appreciating the time today. And for everyone listening, if you have follow-ups for either of us, feel free to reach out. We work in our professional capacities as we do. But Dr. Weintraub, thank you again for the time today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.